The rain had started hours earlier, a relentless drumming against the windows of my small rural home. The power had flickered out just after sunset, leaving me alone with the sound of the storm and the faint glow of my phone. I'd been scrolling through social media, trying to distract myself from the unease creeping up my spine. The old house creaked and groaned as the wind howled outside, every noise amplified in the silence. I had grown used to being alone. My work as a freelance graphic designer kept me home most days, and I liked the solitude. But tonight felt different. There was an edge to the darkness, a sense of being watched that I couldn't shake. I blamed the true crime podcast I listened to earlier, the one about a serial killer who preyed on women in isolated homes. The battery icon on my phone blinked red. I cursed myself for not charging it earlier. Grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, I headed to the bathroom to brush my teeth and prepared for bed. The beam of light wavered as I moved, casting eerie shadows on the walls. As I passed the living room, I froze. The curtains over the large front window were slightly ajar. I was certain I had closed them earlier. My heart pounded as I approached the window, flashlight trembling in my grip. I peered out into the night, the beam illuminating the rain-soaked yard. Nothing. Just the gnarled oak trees swaying in the wind and the faint outline of the gravel driveway. "Calm down," I whispered to myself. "It's just the wind." I pulled the curtains tightly shut and double-checked the lock on the front door before retreating to my bedroom. I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid, but my nerves refused to settle. I climbed into bed, clutching my phone like a lifeline. The storm outside showed no signs of letting up. A loud bang echoed from somewhere in the house. I shot upright, heart hammering in my chest. I strained my ears, trying to identify the source of the noise. It sounded like it had come from the kitchen. Gripping the flashlight tightly, I tiptoed down the hall. The beam swept across the kitchen, revealing nothing out of place. I checked the back door, still locked. I was about to turn back when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Muddy footprints on the tile floor. The prints led from the back door and disappeared into the hallway I had just come from. My mind raced. Had I somehow missed them earlier? Was someone in the house? A sudden creak from behind me made me whirl around. The beam of the flashlight caught a shadow darting past the doorway. My breath caught my throat as I backed away, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the light. "Who's there?" I called, my voice trembling. No response. The house was silent again, save for the rain and the pounding of my heart. I backed into the corner of the kitchen, trying to keep all the exits in view. My mind was screaming at me to run, but where? Out into the storm, with no power, no neighbors nearby? My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me so badly I almost screamed. I fumbled to answer it without checking the caller ID. "Hello?" I whispered. A man's voice, low and gravelly, came through the line. "Why are you hiding?" My blood turned to ice. I dropped the phone, the call cutting off as it hit the floor. The voice had been too calm, too knowing. My mind reeled. How did he know my name? How did he have my number? Before I could process what was happening, the lights flickered back on. Relief was short-lived as I realized it made me an easier target. I turned off the flashlight and grabbed the largest kitchen knife I could find, the cold steel comforting in my hand. Footsteps echoed down the hallway, deliberate and unhurried. My breathing grew shallow as I crouched behind the kitchen island, trying to make myself as small and invisible as possible. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just outside the kitchen doorway. Come out wherever you are," the voice called, closer now, almost playful. I bit down on my lip to keep from making a sound. I could see the edge of a shadow stretching across the floor, just a few feet away. My grip on the knife tightened. The shadow moved, the figure stepping into the kitchen. He was tall, dressed in dark, rain-soaked clothes. A hood obscured most of his face, but I could see the glint of a knife in his hand. He walked slowly, methodically, scanning the room. I could hear his breathing, steady and calm, in stark contrast to my own ragged gasps. He stopped near the island, his back to me, and I knew this was my only chance. With a surge of adrenaline, I lunged forward, swinging the knife with all my strength. It connected with his shoulder, and he let out a guttural cry, staggering forward. I didn't wait to see if he'd recover. I bolted out of the kitchen, heading for the front door. My hands fumbled with the lock as I heard him coming after me, his footsteps pounding against the floor. I threw the door open and ran into the storm, the cold rain drenching me instantly. I didn't look back, didn't stop, just ran blindly down the driveway and into the woods beyond. Branches scratched at my face and arms as I pushed through the underbrush, my lungs burning with every breath. I could still hear him behind me, the sound of his pursuit growing closer. Suddenly, the ground gave way beneath me. I tumbled down a steep embankment, landing hard on the muddy ground below. Pain shot through my ankle as I tried to stand. I was trapped, the embankment too steep and slippery to climb in the rain. The beam of a flashlight appeared at the top of the hill. I held my breath, pressing myself against the muddy wall, trying to blend into the shadows. The light moved back and forth, searching. "You can't hide forever," the voice taunted, closer now. My fingers closed around a jagged rock. I gripped it tightly, ready to fight if he came down after me. The light stopped moving, and for a moment, all I could hear was the rain. Then slowly, it began to retreat. I stayed frozen, listening to his footsteps fade into the distance. Hours seemed to pass before I dared to move. My phone was long gone, my body aching and soaked to the bone. I dragged myself through the woods, finally reaching a neighbor's house at dawn. They called the police, who searched my home and the surrounding area. There was no sign of an intruder, just the muddy footprints and the blood from where I'd stabbed him. They assured me they would investigate, but I knew it was unlikely they'd find him. People like him didn't just disappear. For weeks, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house, every gust of wind made me jump. I installed locks, cameras, anything to make myself feel safe again. But deep down, I knew he was still out there, waiting, watching. I would never feel safe again. It all started with a simple buzzing noise. I had just finished dinner and was about to settle down with a book when I heard it. A faint, high-pitched hum coming from somewhere in the house. At first, I thought it might be a light bulb or some sort of electrical issue. But as I wandered from room to room, the noise followed me. It wasn't until I reached the basement door that I realized it was coming from below. My stomach twisted. The basement and I weren't on good terms. It was unfinished, damp, and full of shadows that seemed to shift when you weren't looking. Still, I couldn't just ignore the sound. Grabbing a flashlight from the kitchen drawer, I took a deep breath and opened the door. The wooden steps creaked under my weight as I descended. The buzzing grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't electrical, I realized. It was organic. Like the sound of 1,000 tiny wings beating in unison. The thought made my skin crawl. The beam of my flashlight swept across the basement, illuminating the cluttered mess of old furniture, boxes, and tools. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then I noticed it. In the far corner of the room, near the foundation wall, was a dark mass. I took a hesitant step closer, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a swarm of insects. Flies, maybe, or something similar. They were clustered around a small hole in the wall, so densely packed that they looked almost solid. I gagged at the smell, a sickly sweet rot that made my eyes water. My first thought was to call an exterminator, but as I reached for my phone, the swarm shifted. It moved as one, a fluid, undulating wave that surged towards me. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the flashlight. The swarm didn't scatter or break apart as insects should. It was cohesive, purposeful, intelligent. I bolted up the stairs, slamming the basement door behind me. My hands were shaking as I turned the lock, as if that flimsy barrier could stop whatever was down there. I spent the rest of the night in the living room, the lights on and my ears straining for any sound. But the house was silent. The next morning, I convinced myself that I had overreacted. It was just bugs. Disgusting, yes, but nothing supernatural. I called an exterminator who promised to come by that afternoon. Until then, I avoided the basement like the plague. When the exterminator arrived, I showed him the basement door and tried to explain what I'd seen. He gave me a skeptical look, but didn't say anything, just grabbed his gear and headed down. I waited at the top of the stairs, listening. For a while, there was nothing but the occasional rustle as he moved around. Then I heard a scream. It was cut off almost immediately, followed by a loud crash. My heart leapt into my throat. "Are you okay?" I shouted, but there was no response. The buzzing started again, louder this time, and I could swear it was coming from inside the walls as well as the basement. I ran out of the house and called 911. By the time the police and paramedics arrived, the buzzing had stopped. They found the exterminator at the bottom of the stairs, unconscious but alive. He was covered in welts, his skin pale and clammy. They said it looked like he'd been stung or bitten by something, but they couldn't find any insects in the basement. After that, I couldn't stay in the house. I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend while I tried to figure out what to do. But even away from the house, the buzzing followed me. I'd hear it at night, faint but unmistakable, coming from the vents or the corners of the room. My friend couldn't hear it, no matter how much I begged her to listen. Then I started seeing them, not the swarm, but the individual insects. They'd appear in impossible places. A fly crawling out of my bathroom sink, a beetle inside my sealed water bottle. Each time I felt a strange, suffocating pressure in my chest, as if the air around me was thickening. I tried everything: pest control, priests, even a psychic my friend knew. Nothing worked. The psychic was the only one who seemed to understand. She said the swarm wasn't just insects, it was something older, something hungry, and it had chosen me. I've stopped running. There's no point. The buzzing is constant now, a background hum that never leaves me. The insects appear more frequently, sometimes crawling across my skin while I sleep. I've stopped brushing them off. They don't bite or sting anymore. They just watch. I don't know what they want. I don't know how to stop it. All I know is that I'm not alone anymore. And I'm starting to think I never was. It started as a dare. My friends and I had been swapping ghost stories around a campfire, the kind of spooky tales that were always fun until someone took them too seriously. That someone, as usual, was Max. He'd grown up in this town and swore up and down that the abandoned house of Greystone Hill was haunted. Not just haunted, he said, but cursed. A place no one in their right mind would ever set foot in after dark. So naturally, we decided to go there. It's just a house, I said, more to convince myself than anyone else. I didn't believe in ghosts, not really, but as we stood in front of the house that night, I couldn't deny the knot of unease tightening in my stomach. The house was massive, its windows gaping like empty sockets. The wooden siding was warped and splintered, and the front door hung slightly ajar. Every part of it seemed designed to make you feel unwelcome. Even the air around it felt heavier, colder. "Let's just take a picture and leave," Jenna said, her voice shaking. She was gripping my arm so tightly it started to go numb. "No way," Max replied, his grin wide and reckless. "We have to go inside, otherwise it doesn't count." I wanted to tell him it didn't have to count, that this was stupid and we could just leave. But then he pushed the door open, and the sound of the hinges groaning seemed to root me in place. Jenna let out a small whimper, but none of us moved to stop him. "Come on," Max said, stepping inside. He turned to look at me, his eyes gleaming in the moonlight. "Unless you're scared." That did it. I wasn't about to let him call me a coward. Taking a deep breath, I followed him inside. Jenna and Sam came after me, though I could feel their reluctance radiating off them in waves. The air inside the house was worse than outside. It smelled of mildew and rot, and every step we took sent up clouds of dust. The floorboards creaked ominously beneath our feet, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed from somewhere deep within. "See? Nothing to worry about," Max said, his voice too loud in the silence. He led us into what had once been a living room. The furniture was still there, though it was covered in tattered sheets and years of grime. A fireplace dominated one wall, its bricks blackened with soot. "Okay, we've seen it," Jenna said. "Can we go now?" "Not yet," Max said, pulling out his phone. "We need proof." He snapped a picture, the flash illuminating the room for a brief second. When the light faded, I thought I saw something move in the corner of my vision. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there, just shadows. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "See what?" Sam replied, looking around nervously. "It's nothing," Max said. "You're just spooking yourself." Maybe he was right. Maybe it was just my imagination. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone, that something was watching us. "Let's check upstairs," Max said, already heading for the staircase. "Are you serious?" Jenna asked, but she followed him anyway. We all did. The stairs groaned under our weight, and I couldn't stop picturing them collapsing beneath us. But they held, and soon we were standing in a narrow hallway lined with doors. "Let's split up," Max said. "No way," I repeated immediately. "We stick together." Max rolled his eyes but didn't argue. We opened the first door on the left. It was a bedroom, the bed still intact but covered in a thick layer of dust. The walls were covered in faded wallpaper, and a shattered mirror hung above the dresser. As we stepped inside, the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. "Do you feel that?" Jenna whispered, her breath visible in the cold air. Before I could answer, the door slammed shut behind us. Jenna screamed, and I lunged for the handle, yanking it open. The hallway was empty. "It's the wind," Max said, but his bravado was starting to crack. He was glancing over his shoulder, his movements jerky and tense. We checked the other rooms quickly, finding nothing but more dust and decay. Still, the sense of being watched grew stronger with every passing second. By the time we reached the last door at the end of the hall, my hands were shaking. "Let's just leave," I said. "One more room," Max insisted. He pushed the door open, and we were hit with a blast of cold air. The room was empty except for a single chair in the center. It faced away from us, towards the window. The glass was cracked, letting in a faint breeze that made the curtains flutter like ghostly hands. "Okay, we're done," Jenna said, backing away. But Max stepped forward, his phone held out to take another picture. The flash went off, and for a moment, the room was bathed in light. That's when I saw it. A figure stood behind the chair, tall and shadowy, its face obscured. It was there for less than a second, but it was enough. I grabbed Max's arm and pulled him back. "We need to go," I said, my voice shaking. "What? Why?" he asked, but I didn't answer. I was already dragging him towards the stairs. The others followed, their footsteps echoing loudly in the empty house. As we reached the bottom of the stairs, the front door slammed shut. The sound reverberated through the house and we froze. The buzzing started then, low and insistent, like a swarm of insects just out of sight. "What is that?" Sam asked, his voice high and panicked. "I don't know," I said. "Just run." We bolted for the door, Max yanking it open with a strength born of fear. The buzzing grew louder, almost deafening, as we burst outside. The air felt lighter, freer, but I didn't stop running until we reached the car. None of us spoke as we drove away, the house growing smaller in the rearview mirror. But I couldn't shake the image of the figure standing behind the chair. It had been watching us. I was sure of it. And as we rounded the bend, leaving Greystone Hill behind, I thought I saw something standing at the window, its shadowy form silhouetted against the moonlight. We never talked about that night again. Max deleted the pictures, and we all went back to pretending it hadn't happened. But I can't forget. Every so often I hear the buzzing, faint and distant, and I wonder if the house remembers us too. It was just supposed to be a normal evening. I had left work a little later than usual, the office already empty except for the cleaning crew. The parking garage was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzing faintly as I walked to my car. The sound of my heels echoed off the concrete walls, the rhythm steady and comforting. I unlocked my car with a beep, the sound startling in the quiet space. Sliding into the driver's seat, I tossed my bag onto the passenger side and started the engine. The familiar hum of the motor brought a small sense of relief. The day had been long, and all I wanted was to get home, put on some music, and relax. The drive out of the city was uneventful at first. Traffic had thinned, and the streetlights painted the roads in soft, golden patches. I switched the radio to a podcast, something lighthearted to help me unwind. As I merged onto the highway, I noticed a car pull in behind me. A dark sedan. Nothing unusual, just close enough to be noticeable, but I didn't think much of it. After about 10 minutes, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The sedan was still there, following my every turn. I frowned, my fingers tightening on the wheel. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Lots of people live in the same general area. But as I exited the highway onto the quieter suburban roads, the sedan stayed close. Too close. My stomach tightened with unease. I turned down a street that wasn't my usual route home, wanting to test my theory. The sedan followed. My heart rate picked up, a cold sweat forming on the back of my neck. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were lost. Maybe they just happened to be going the same way. I made another turn, then another, taking a route that zigzagged through the neighborhood. The sedan mirrored every move. By now, my chest felt tight, my breaths shallow. I reached for my phone and fumbled to unlock it, my fingers trembling. Who should I call? The police? A friend? What would I even say? The car's headlights loomed closer in my rearview mirror, almost blinding me. It was tailing me now, too close for comfort. I sped up, my pulse pounding in my ears. My mind raced with every worst-case scenario I could think of. Was this some kind of road rage? A mistake? Or was it deliberate? I turned onto a main road, hoping the traffic and streetlights would make me feel safer. The sedan kept pace. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard. It was nearly 10 p.m. The streets were mostly empty, the few other cars moving in the opposite direction. The glowing sign of a gas station up ahead caught my eye, and I decided to pull in. The sedan followed. I'd at least be in a well-lit area with cameras. I parked near the entrance and stayed in the car, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The sedan pulled in behind me but didn't park. Instead, it idled a few spaces away. My skin crawled as I watched the driver's silhouette through the windshield. They weren't getting out. They weren't going into the gas station. They were just sitting there. Gathering my courage, I grabbed my phone and stepped out of the car, pretending to be on a call. The cool night air hit my skin, but the heat of my fear made it hard to focus. I walked towards the gas station entrance, keeping an eye on the sedan. The driver's door opened and a man stepped out. He was average height, dressed in dark clothes, his face obscured by a baseball cap. I ducked inside the gas station, the fluorescent lights glaring bright. The clerk, a young guy, scrolling on his phone, looked up briefly. I forced a smile and pretended to browse the shelves, my heart hammering. I kept glancing outside, watching as the man stood by his car, leaning casually against it. He wasn't pumping gas, he wasn't heading inside. He was waiting. I decided to buy something, a bottle of water, just to give myself an excuse to linger. As I paid, I leaned towards the clerk and lowered my voice. "Hey, can you keep an eye on me? There's someone outside and I think they've been following me." The clerk frowned and nodded, glancing toward the parking lot. "You want me to call the cops?" I hesitated. Was I overreacting? "Not yet. Let me see if he leaves." I stayed in the gas station for what felt like an eternity, sipping my water and pacing near the window. The man eventually got back into his car, but he didn't leave. Instead, he circled around the lot and parked further away, still watching. The clerk came up beside me. "That's not normal," he said quietly. I nodded, my throat dry. "Can you call now?" He grabbed his phone and dialed, his voice steady as he explained the situation to the operator. I kept glancing outside, half expecting the man to drive off. Instead, he stayed where he was, his car idling. My hands were shaking so badly I had to shove them into my pockets. A few minutes later, red and blue lights flashed in the distance. The man must have seen him too, because he suddenly pulled out of the lot and sped away. My knees went weak with relief as I slumped against the counter. The police arrived moments later. I gave them a description of the car and the man, my voice trembling as I recounted everything that had happened. They promised to patrol the area and advised me to drive straight home and stay locked inside. When I finally got home, I double-checked all the locks on my doors and windows. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every creak of the house, every distant car engine made my heart race. I kept wondering who that man was and what he had wanted. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. For weeks, I took different routes home, always checking my mirrors, always looking over my shoulder. The sedan never reappeared, but the fear lingered. A constant shadow in the back of my mind. I never stayed late at work again. I wasn't going to take that chance. Some people say you're more likely to hurt yourself worrying about something that might not happen. Maybe they're right, but that night taught me that instincts exist for a reason. Sometimes it's better to trust them than to find out what happens if you don't.